Welcome to Econ 102, where economist Noah Smith and I make sense of what's happening in the news, technology, business, and beyond through the lens of economics. Let's jump right in.
I enjoyed our abundance chat last week, and it's been cool to see. I just listened to Ezra and Derek on Lex and really see them on the circuit. Is your sense that this is sort of a set of ideas that is gaining a constituency? Is your on the left? Is your sense that it is getting, before we get to the new right, which you wrote about, I think is fantastic. Let's just sort of close the loop on the left. Do you think, as the reception surprised you, do you think this is a niche sort of wonky set of ideas that, doomed for the sort of small amount of reasonable people, super sort of economically literate people, or do you think, hey, this actually has a constituency here on the left?
So, I do think it has a constituency, and I do think it's getting lots and lots of excitement, among Democrats, liberals, etc. When people say the left, I automatically think of Palestine protesters and Bernie fans. But if you mean like the more generalized left of America, the Democrats, liberals, etc., that half of the country, then yes, I absolutely think it is gaining lots of currency. People are really excited, and I did not expect that, because I thought, A, it's too wonky, it's too and B, it's optimistic at a time when Trump is just smashing lots of American things. Try telling Donald Trump that we need abundance, we need to build this and that, when Donald Trump is busy destroying the auto industry with tariffs. He's doing the exact opposite. And so obviously there may be people in Donald Trump's administration, buried somewhere in the administration, who are trying to fight NEPA or make it easier to invest in America, who really are hoping against hope that somehow tariffs restore American manufacturing through this magic that Trump thinks that they exert. Maybe they still would believe in something like abundance, but no, primarily it's something we know isn't going to happen soon. Maybe we can make it happen on the state and local level. So maybe we can do YIMBY stuff and maybe be more efficient with state government. All those things we can make it happen. But then I think there's this general attitude of pessimism, Trump is just destroying America. And so what can we do with abundance, happy, sunny, blah, blah. This is what I expected. What I did not expect is that everyone is woohoo, this is awesome. And looking at that enthusiasm that is materialized for Ezra and Derek's book and this whole notion in general, I have a few ideas of why that's true, of what's catching fire with people, but they're all sort of retroactive explanations that I didn't expect. And so, you got to take those with a grain of salt.
Say more about them. Which parts are resonating the most, you think?
Right. So I think that there are two things. Number one, abundance represents sort of the idea of national unity, the idea of we're all in this together. Because Ezra and Derek don't really say this. And one of my problems was that they didn't say this in the book. But they could have said it, and it makes a lot of sense. And I think it's driving what a lot of people like about it, is that it's something that, it's not going to unite the country, but it's something where you think in a nationalistic way. You think in terms of let's make our country better. You don't think of abundance for this group and disabundance for that other group. It's not a zero-sum thing. It's not class warfare. It's not, here are our class enemies, let's defeat them. Right? And I think that, or here are racial enemies, let's defeat them. Let's elevate this race and, disempower this race. Let's elevate this group and disempower this other group or this class, etc. It's not any of that. It is a uniting, not a divisive kind of thing, and provides, I think that people really yearn for that after the 2010s and what the Democratic Party has sort of become and what the progressive movement has become. People yearn for something to unite us. And the last time we saw that was Obama's first term, with the hope and change and blah, blah, end the Iraq War, fix the Great Recession, and, reform healthcare. That was this uniting mission of Obama. And he made pretty good progress on all three, but that's a story for another day. Obama, underrated president, because wokeness broke out in his second term. People remember that and get mad about that, but that wasn't really his fault.
What do you think he should get credit for?
Obama, number one, stimulus bill was good. yeah, it was expensive. It increased the debt, which we should have gotten rid of some of later, paid back some of later, but it was the right thing to do at the time. Financial regulation Dodd-Frank has some problems with it, but overall, like the derivative stuff in there was really good. And made a 2008 crisis in the future. Basically, no one even talks about that anymore. There were some problems with it, with the way it handles, like, what banks are allowed to do and, bank profit and things. Anyway, we'll go into that later. Dodd-Frank, good thing. Get out of Iraq, good. It didn't, we weren't entirely out of Iraq forever, because then ISIS popped up. We went back in Iraq, kicked their ass, and then got out for real. But certainly this whole idea where, like, Iraq is an American province and we have, like, the green zone and, like, all this stuff, which we had known during the Bush years, Obama got rid of that. And it didn't, like, Iraq didn't collapse into some, like, Islamic fundamentalist state. I mean, ISIS came and then they were defeated. Iraq didn't turn into, like, an Iranian proxy. Like, Iran still has proxy militias there, but, we won the Iraq war. Okay. Like, I know people like to say we lost the Iraq war, and it's understandable to say that because it weakened our geopolitical position, divided our society, and destroyed global norms, and got a lot of people killed. That's bad. The Iraq war was a bad thing, and I wouldn't have done it, but we did win it. And Obama sort of, like, realized that and just got out, and that was the right move. And so that was good. And then Obamacare was pretty good. Like, it's I would have done a lot more cost control stuff there. But if you look at healthcare spending as a percentage of GDP, around the time we did Obamacare, it starts to level off. So it's not like it did nothing, right? And some of that's due to Obamacare, some of that's maybe due to saturation, people just deciding I can't spend any more money on fMRI, screw this crap. So there's confounding factors here, but I think that Obama did a lot of stuff to address all the problems that we had, like, in 2008, right? Also, Obama was much tougher on immigration than George Bush had been, and deported a lot more people. And under Obama, the number of illegal immigrants in the country shrank by about 1 million. Total number of illegal immigrants in America shrank by about 1 million. And even the independent estimates that say that the baseline number of illegal immigrants was higher than the public census numbers claim, which is realistic, because illegal immigrants will hide from the census takers, right? Even those people say, well, according to us, and they looked at, like, border crossing data, Mexican data, and all kinds of other sources, and just collated all these other sources. Even they said that illegal immigrants, the number fell by like 1 million during Obama's term in office. So, like, that was, I don't think that, like, any possible thing we could do to remove illegal immigrants would be good, right? But I think that overall that was a good strategy. Like, we did deport 1 million people. So you want to call that a mass deportation? Sure. We deported almost entirely criminals.
Sure.
So so Obama didn't actually change the definition to say, like, oh, we turn people back at the border, that's a deportation. Actually, well, we sort of did something like that, but it's under Bush. Obama started a mass deportation of criminals program. And so that's one reason why arrest rates among illegal immigrants fell so much. And now you can have guys at, like, the Cato Institute saying, look, illegal immigrants commit less crime. And people are like, what? It's because we took the criminal ones and we mass deported them during Obama. Like, we deported like 1/10 of the illegal immigrant population, the criminal 10th, right? And I know this because my sister did that. My sister was a lawyer for the Justice Department whose job was deporting illegal immigrants who commit crimes.
Yeah. Wow.
We did a lot of that. So anyway, Obama did a lot of stuff. It was reasonable. It was centrist. It was, for the good of all Americans kind of stuff, right? Fix healthcare, fix the economy, get out of Iraq, all this stuff. It was a message of hope and change. And then, like, this had nothing to do with, like, him being black. Like, this is, he was actually a fairly conservative black guy. He was like, Obama was basically like Captain Sisko from Deep Space Nine. Like, we got a conservative black guy to, like, run the country. And just as Sisko got rid of the Dominion, Obama kicked out illegal immigrants. No, Sisko ended the war. Okay, now Obama was the real Sisko. That's a new post for the future.
Amazing. Okay, I guess the critiques that Obama gets is, one, I guess the healthcare thing didn't work to the degree that he hoped. I guess the foreign policy stuff, people think that he sort of, like, conceded this kind of, what do they call it, like measured decline of America, um, and was too willing to sort of collaborate with our enemy, like not a friend to Israel or something, the countries in the Middle East. I think just people see him as weak on foreign policy and not really interested in like being I don't know, getting deals done, being a true politician, as opposed to more of like a academic or rally or.
So that's actually correct. That's correct. Obama did fail to. Of course, I mean, like Bush and Clinton also failed at this. So like it was like everyone since the Cold War sort of had this delusion that China was going to be our buddy if we just open our markets to them. And Obama shared this delusion, and it didn't work out. But everybody else had that delusion too, and Bush was the worst, letting all the deindustrialization happen under Bush, basically. If you look at the manufacturing employment under Bush, because China entered the WTO then. That's when China entered the WTO. That's what deindustrialized us. And then that was in 2001, right? The real 9/11, it fell right off a cliff, U.S. manufacturing employment. But then Obama continued that, and it was bad. And like, he and Michelle Obama made this like wishy-washy documentary, American Factory, about how like, well, actually the Chinese are just good at making everything, naturally good at making everything. What can we do? And like, it was very stupid, because of the military angle, they just did not recognize it all. They didn't recognize China as a threat. They didn't understand that stuff. And on Russia, they basically like sat there and scolded Russia as Russia took over Crimea and the Donbass, and like didn't stand up to them then. They started arming Ukraine, which was good, by the way. Like Ukraine did not have the chops to stand up to Russia at that time. Like Ukraine can stand up to Russia now. And increasingly without external weaponry, Ukraine is standing up to Russia. By the way, have you heard about this? Like Ukraine just like went ham on drone manufacturing and now makes like a bazillion military drones a year, and just like is increasingly replacing like artillery, riflemen, and like missiles with drones.
Do they have their own Anduril or something, or how are they? How are they doing?
Yeah, they have their own like a million little Andurils. They have a whole ton of companies making drones. Yes, they do. And Anduril is like recognizes this and is now like, we should make drones in Ukraine. And so Anduril is like learning from the Ukrainians right now how to mass manufacture, right? Because Anduril doesn't know how to mass manufacture. They know how to prototype. They know how to invent shit. They don't know how to like make a million things of it and make it efficiently. And Ukraine is teaching them, and they will be good because of this.
Nothing like existential crisis to spur innovation,
Right. And then like America withdrawing aid is we paused aid back in like 24, right? We stopped giving them as many like artillery things to shoot, and they were like, okay, well, what are we going to do instead of artillery? And they're running out of guys because like Russia just has a lot more guys than Ukraine. Much bigger country. It's like 4 times the size, and like so they're like, okay, we'll just use drones. That's what we got. And Ukraine, by the way, has like the best like engineers, computer scientists, like programmers, and like innovators, like in all of the Soviet Union, right? If you look at where the people who made like all the great Soviet weapons came from, like a hugely disproportionate amount came from Ukraine. So like you basically, when Ukraine left, it was like they are they're the Iowa of the USSR, because they they produce the grain, and that's what everyone knows them for, and that's what their flag actually is. It's a field of grain, blue and then gold. But then so it's a grain field, but it's also like the like Silicon Valley and like Texas. Imagine like Silicon Valley and Texas and Iowa got together and seceded from America, and like that was a country. And then the rest of America, is just like, grr, we're coming after you, but like can't get it past NEPA. Like this. Like imagine that. That's basically like Ukraine fighting off Russia.
Okay, circling back. So we started talking about Obama because we've been talking about abundance basically being a rallying cry, and we haven't seen rallying cries.
That's right. It's something Americans can all get behind. And why do you do abundance? Because Americans deserve more. You deserve more because you're an American. You got a Confederate flag on your pickup truck. I don't give a shit. You deserve electricity. You deserve a house. You deserve it because you're American, even if you have some beliefs I think are stupid, and bad. Like I don't like the Confederacy. It's a piece of shit. But like, but you got a Confederate flag in your pickup truck. You're still getting a cheap house. You're still going to get electricity. It doesn't matter, right? You're like, okay, you're like a rich person who lives in a suburb. Cool. You get to have cheap solar power. You get to have cheap batteries. You get to have cheaper electricity. Maybe you don't need it because you're rich. You get to have it, and you get to have like, maybe I should shill for impulse. You get a cool stove. I don't know. But like you get, that hasn't made it into the abundance agenda yet, unfortunately. But anyway, like, rich people need the government to like work too. It would be nice if rich people could take a train, like in Japan, billionaires take trains. Why do they take trains? Because it's nice and clean and everything works and it's on time and it's like, it's great, and a billionaire in New York will not take a train. They'll take a taxi. Train is for the middle class. And that's a problem. That's still, enough people take the train in New York to sustain it. But like the rich people should have the ability to like take a train. The rich people shouldn't have to worry about where to park their cars. It's still annoying to like cruise around looking for parking or whatever, park at the garage and walk or whatever. If you're a rich person, you can have abundance too, like abundance for everybody. Obviously, rich people are going to have to pay higher taxes. That's just part of living in a country that works. But currently, rich people pay higher taxes for a country that doesn't work. That's a little worse.
We'll continue our interview in a moment after a word from our sponsors. What does the future hold for business? Ask 9 experts and you'll get 10 answers. It's a bull market. It's a bear market. Rates will rise or fall. Can someone invent a crystal ball? Until then, over 41,000 businesses have future-proofed their business with NetSuite by Oracle, the #1 cloud ERP, bringing accounting, financial management, inventory, HR into one fluid platform. With one unified business management suite, there's one source of truth, giving you the visibility and control you need to make quick decisions. With real-time insights and forecasting, you're peering into the future with actionable data. When you're closing the books in days and not weeks, you're spending less time looking backwards and more time on what's next. If I had needed this product, it's what I'd use. Whether your company is earning millions or even hundreds of millions, NetSuite helps you respond to immediate challenges and seize your biggest opportunities. Speaking of opportunity, download the CFO's Guide to AI and Machine Learning at netsuite.com/102. The guide is free to you at netsuite.com/102. netsuite.com/102.
Derek, in his book, he sort of, to echo what you were saying, we're now supply constrained because we've been restricting supply or regulating way too much. It's been so hard to build. But he makes the argument that at one point, maybe around the 2008, et cetera, we were more demand constrained, and there were a set of policies meant to stimulate demand. Can you explain that just from the kind of Econ 102 perspective? Like, what was the need then, and what policies helped there?
So 2008, we had this giant financial crisis. Lehman Brothers failed, Bear Stearns failed, and then like all these other giant banks were on the verge of failure. They got bailed out, okay, because they bought all these stupid bonds that sucked and died and were based on housing, and those bonds eventually made money, but it took them like 10 years to make money, and ended up making money for the Fed because the Fed took it all off their hands. So at this time, everyone was scared. Everyone was scared. Banks were scared to lend, so companies couldn't get money. Companies were scared to invest for the future because they didn't know what was happening. Consumers were scared to consume because their wealth was evaporating, and because banks weren't lending to their employers, and their employers might fire them, and unemployment would go up. So everyone was just scared as hell. Not irrationally scared, but reasonably scared. You had a coordination failure in the economy. The economy broke down. This is called, in economics, we would call this a liquidity preference shock. What that means is liquidity is like cash. Preference is like, I want cash. Shock is like, suddenly I want cash. So look, I translated from economics ease, right? Econ language. Liquidity preference shock. Suddenly everyone wants cash. And when everyone wants cash at once, no one's spending it. Everyone wants cash like in the bank account or preferably like under the mattress, right? Cash under the mattress, give it to me. But what happens if everyone takes all their cash and sticks it under the mattress instead of spending it? Well, what happens then is companies can't get money, right? Like you're not spending money on like a new bed, a new washing machine, a new car, like a bigger apartment. You're not spending money on anything, right? And when you're not spending money on anything, then companies can't invest, right? They can't. The companies are going to scale back. When companies scale back, what do? They fire people and they cut salaries. When you fire people and cut salaries, what do people do in response to that? Well, they stop spending. So as you can see, it's a little bit of a cycle there. This is called an aggregate demand shock. This is aggregate demand because nobody wants to spend. Aggregate demand shock, lower aggregate demand, that's just a fancy John Maynard Keynes term for nobody wants to spend. And if nobody wants to spend, nobody can like invest, nobody can build, because no one wants to spend. So the government comes in and says, okay, I will spend. So usually aggregate demand shocks are small, and what you do is you cut interest rates. And when you cut interest rates, that says, okay, well, now it's easier to spend. I didn't want to spend, but damn, look at these low interest rates. I better spend. It's a little intervention, minor intervention. But then when you get something as big and catastrophic as the 2008 crash, especially when interest rates go to zero and you can't even cut them anymore, right? The zero lower bound, they call that, because interest rates can't go below zero. Like, you can't charge people negative interest on bonds. Like, hey, take this bond that shrinks every year. No, I don't want it. And so you can't get people to take a bond that doesn't pay interest. And so like you'll just take cash instead because it pays zero interest. Or anyway, point being, that when all this happens and the economy seizes up, interest rate cuts can't do the job. So you can do QE, which is basically the Fed like prints money and buys bonds from people and hopes that does something. And then that probably does do something. And of course, you can also address the root cause of it by bank bailouts, and especially by the Fed's sort of stealth bank bailout where they printed a bunch of money and bought all those shitty mortgage-backed bonds off of all the banks, right? That was the real bailout, by the way. And it didn't cost the taxpayer a dime. In fact, it made money for the taxpayer because 10 years later, when the housing market recovered, those bonds suddenly made money, right? And so the Fed was just able to hold on to them for a long time because the Fed can't go bankrupt, despite what Ron Paul and Rand Paul may tell you. So anyway, point being that you need to get the government to spend money, borrow and spend money. And it's the spender of last resort. And so the government, what should it spend money on? The answer is infrastructure and payments to the states. So like the states do like, education, stuff like that. So you give some money to the states to like keep the teachers hired and whatever. But mainly you build roads, right? You build bridges and you build power lines and you build all these things. It's a time to build, right? And it's especially good as a time to build because remember, interest rates are really low during a depression, a recession where the interest rates hit zero is basically a depression. And so during a depression, you've got the low interest rates, and then ZERP basically happens, and then the government can borrow really, really cheaply. Okay, borrow cheaply, build productive things. Okay, build infrastructure. You can get some effect just from having the government like take the money, bury it in a hole, and have people come and dig it up. Right? That's like what Keynes talked about. You can get some effect from that, right? It's not zero. And this is basically a temporary tax cut. That's exactly what a temporary tax cut is. Have people dig the money out of a hole. You could just give the money to people. And so like that's a temporary tax cut. And Obama did lots of that. And honestly, he did too much of that. Like more of it should have been in terms of building some productive thing, because if you pay people money to build you a road, then not only do you accomplish the objective of getting money into the economy, injecting money into the economy to sort of jumpstart the cycle of spending, but you also get a road on top of that. And we did that. The one problem was that because in the Great Recession, there was this imperative of like get money into the economy, we weren't very efficient about getting roads for our money. Right? We spent money on California high-speed rail, and that money went to like consultants and shit. Yes, and that ends up being just like a very unfair kind of tax cut, right? Like a tax cut for consultants. It's lob money at their head. And so the way we rushed money out the door, we did not make sure that like we got value for money, and this ended up having problems down the road because now, as Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson would tell you, we don't have good systems for making sure that stuff actually gets built. So, by the way, remember I said Doge is mostly an ideological purge, but then actually they may try to end cost plus contracting, which is something that would actually really get America building again more. And Trump may take some action against NEPA, and that may get America building more. So Trump may do a couple abundance things through no fault of his own. But anyway, but those will not cancel out the tariffs. But anyway, that's another story. The story is that that was what Obama did that was good, but it was a problem of a different time, and it created problems down the road. Like FDR solved a lot of problems of the Depression. And the ways in which he solved that ended up setting us up for some problems down the road.
Sure.
But that's fine. That's how things work, right? Like in the Cold War, we solved the Cold War by de facto allying with China against Russia, right? And that helped us win because it distracted the Russians, and it basically just distracted the Russians and freed us up to like focus only on the Russians, right? And so we won the Cold War. That was great, but it strengthened China in a way that would ultimately start building them up as a rival. The solution to one era's problems plant the seeds of the next era's problems.
And just close that loop. What was the FDR example you gave of what were the problems at it?
Oh, so like FDR made unions. So FDR made this deal with the unions to basically allow people to unionize, but then he made it shop by shop. So essentially you have massive amounts of resources wasting on people fighting unions instead of just the whole sector getting together. Like in many countries, what they do is like the whole sector gets together and just like basically sets wages for like all the fast food workers within like this one city, right? We don't have that. We have every fast food joint in America has like a fight over whether you unionize. And so like it's a giant waste of resources. And so that was sort of Social Security is not a fully funded pension system, right? It's a pay it forward system. That was necessary then because it wasn't necessary. We could have borrowed a hell of a lot of money to fully fund a alternative to Social Security that was a fully funded system. But FDR was deep into austerity. He did not want the government to borrow money. And so he was a very fiscally austerity minded person. And because of that, we had Social Security be a pay it forward system, which is fine for a while until population growth slows, right? When you have a baby boom, when you have like a fertility rate above replacement, then then a pay it forward system actually works really well. This is actually a very classic result in economics, that when you have higher fertility rates, a pay it forward system is actually the most efficient thing you can do. So in a baby boom, it's the most efficient thing you can do. But when you get slow population growth, it's like you don't have enough young people to pay. You need the old people to like pay for themselves instead of the young people to like pay for all the old people. And so pretty simple way of understanding that. And so, but because we didn't want to borrow a shit ton of money in the Depression, have our government go into a lot of debt. And we ended up doing that anyway in World War II. We borrowed money. But then we didn't want to do it for the Depression because FDR didn't want it. We ended up making this pay it forward system that now is, gonna bite us a little bit, and we're gonna have to cut benefits a lot more than if we had fully funded it.
And okay, so now let's finish the loop on the sort of demand side policies that we enacted after post 2008, creating problems in the future. Is it just that we forgot about sort of the supply side, or it somehow limited us on the supply side, or we couldn't do both, or what was sort of
and it built up debt. So now, like, as long as interest rates are low, you can carry debt. So we came into the Obama administration with a debt of 60% of GDP, and we left it with debt of 100% of GDP. And that was all in response to the Great Recession. That's a lot of debt, and that means the more of a stock of debt you have, the more sensitive you are to interest rate hikes. So that meant that if inflation ever returned, which, spoiler, it did, then the Fed has to hike interest rates to control the inflation. What happens? The interest rates start going up on all the government debt. As you roll it over, you have to roll it over at higher rates, and then the interest rate on government debt starts going up, and government interest expenses go up, and it starts crowding out the rest of the budget, which is exactly what you're seeing now.
On that point, is the ratio GDP going to be over 100% kind of indefinitely, or do you envision a point where we get it down? And if so, is that a combination of like a little bit of inflation, some higher GDP growth, like how productivity, how do we?
Well, so inflation erodes that number because the debt is priced in dollars, and inflation decreases the value of a dollar, so it decreases debt to GDP. Inflation basically adds fake GDP to our GDP. But then the number of the number of dollars we owe, it's like a dollar matters less, so it's easy to pay back a dollar because our GDP is higher. And yes, it's with funny money, but that funny money really allows us to pay back debt more easily. So inflation erodes debt. In fact, during Biden, the inflation during Biden was so high that despite the fact that Biden was borrowing and spending way too much money, you actually saw the debt to GDP go down over Biden's term.
So is that basically the answer? We're just going to have a little higher inflation?
It's part of the answer. So it's a third of the answer. A third of the answer is going to be extended period of higher inflation. That's not going to be fun, but actually we had that in like the 50s and 60s. Our inflation was like higher than it is now, or than it was during like the 80s, 90s, and 2000s. And it helped erode the debt of World War II, right? We lived with like 3% inflation during that era, or 4%, 4% inflation. And you know what? It was fine. We're a happy country anyway. And so it's not the worst thing, but it's going to annoy people. And it's going to last for a while. You see like inflation at like inflation's going back up now because of tariffs. Inflation's going like inflation last month was like 4.5%. Welcome back. It wasn't dead. It's back. There's your cold open right there. So that will be one. I think maybe if historical precedent holds, that'll be a third of it, or roughly one of the three pieces. Let's say the other two pieces are tax cuts or spending cuts. We need to do that.
So will we get it down to a reason? Like, what level could we get it down to, or is it always just
you get down as low as you like? 25% of GDP, if you like.
Wow,
25% of GDP would be fine. We wouldn't even notice it. Yeah, we could get that down. We could realistically, like, getting it down to 60% of GDP would probably, now it's at like 120-ish, I think.
We'll continue our interview in a moment after a word from our sponsors. Every time I hop on the 101 freeway in SF, I look up at the various tech billboards and think, damn, turpentine should definitely be up there. And I bet I'm not alone. In a world of endless scrolling and ad blockers, sometimes the most powerful way to reach people is in the real world. That's where AdQuick comes in. The easiest way to book out-of-home ads, like billboards, vehicle wraps, and airport displays. The same way you would order an Uber. Started by Instacart alums, AdQuick was born from their own personal struggles to book and measure ad success. AdQuick's audience targeting, campaign management, and analytics bring the precision and efficiency of digital to the real world. Ready to get your brand the attention it deserves? Visit adquick.com today to start reaching your customers in the real world. Again, that's adquick.com.
it's basically like whichever president does that is going to be a hero, but probably not reelected or something. Like it's going to be a bitter pill.
Yeah, I mean, like, so Clinton was able to do it and be a hero because there was this real growth boom that we got from like the computer revolution and from the end of the Cold War and all this stuff. And Clinton was able to do this, and he was able to start on this path, and Bush should have continued on this path, but Bush decided that, to go back to like a pandering sort of thing where you just a tax cut for you and a tax cut for you and blah, blah. And to his credit, he did cut taxes more on the middle class than the rich. Like Bush was a compassionate conservative in that he cut taxes more for like the middle class, but it was fiscally irresponsible. Like many things that Bush did was like, well-intentioned, but moronic is the hallmark of the Bush administration. Completely moronic. Like he was not an evil guy, but he got a lot of people killed, and he inadvertently wrecked America in certain ways. Trump is deliberately wrecking America for his insane ideology, whereas Bush inadvertently wrecked America for his incompetent stupidity.
That's cold open. That's a good one. And so why isn't growth in one of your three sort of answers? Just like growing our way out of it?
We can't control it.
Right.
Growth could be a fourth part, and we hope that it is, right? But like, I can't tell you that it will be. Like, I can't tell you that there'll be like a big technology boom, blah, blah. Like fertility rates are going down, so investment's going to be limited. Decoupling is going to happen. And then the other factors that we're going to need to do, the austerity that we're going to need to do, could act as a brake on growth. And so growth, we can't just say grow out of this debt. We can't depend on that. I hope it happens, but I can't tell you that it will. AI could just like supercharge the real economy. AI could just, if AI actually made us grow 5% a year, like some of the people are saying, goodbye debt, bye, poof, solved. But it won't. Because Tyler Cowen's right, and you have lots of little blockages in the thing, and so it may be, but I still think it could increase growth by like a modest amount. If it increases growth by 1% a year, that's gonna like 1% a year compounded over 20 years, right? Like that's more than 20% of our debt to GDP, right? That you get rid of. That'll get rid of like a significant amount. Add higher inflation to that, like that would get rid of a higher amount. And so then we could do, if fiscal austerity, if we just balance the budget and let those two things, and we had higher growth because of AI and then like slightly higher inflation for like 20 years, like that could solve all the debt problem without us having to like run a surplus like Clinton did and actually pay anything back. Okay. That's kind of the best case scenario for debt. I honestly think we're going to have to run a surplus and pay some back. And that's going to be pretty painful. But hopefully AI will cushion the blow of that. And, we will grow on and we'll get rid of artist jobs. By the way, can we, I got to write a post about like all the frickin' people who are like, AI art is evil and fascist. And like, you're turning everything into Miyazaki, you fucking fascist. And it's like, stop having fun. Stop making things and having fun with it. It's like this idea that like, people who make art professionally are like owed a sinecure by the government. You are not.
It's coming for developers.
Everyone in America thinks they're owed a sinecure. You're owed, like, your job is something that is owed to you. Your career is something that is owed to you. It's not owed to you. It is an expedient. It is a thing you did to make money. You found this niche. Now, that niche won't always exist. It's just that is the way of the world, and the world sometimes throws you a curveball. And so, like...
That's an easy one. Or easy one to sort of be on the sort of right side of. I mean, yeah, it's interesting. Okay, so let's segue, because you mentioned Trump's crazy ideology. It's a great segue into your other piece on the new right, which I thought was fascinating, because we don't always think of the right as having an ideology, right? Even, what did they say? The fusionism of sort of the old right was sort of, just a sort of, an alliance of convenience between three groups of people who had the same enemy, right? Sort of the enemy being communists. It was sort of the libertarian business people, the sort of
religious right.
Yeah, the religious right. And then Trump, of course, people say is a cult of personality, so people don't think, and he was formerly a Democrat, so people don't think of him as having like an ingrained ideology. But sort of you write about sort of, the Vance, Trump, sort of, it seems like the right has actually coalesced along some sort of ideology that explains some of the behavior that it's doing both internally and sort of foreign policy wise, especially as it relates to Europe. Why don't you sort of high level just explain a little bit of what you see as sort of this explain this coalescing? What is the underlying ideology?
So the underlying ideology is based around the idea of Western civilization. I grew up thinking that Japan was part of Western civilization. I grew up thinking the free world, was like anybody who was on our side during the Cold War was part of Western civilization. And that like, even China had like its period of like Westernization, blah, blah, blah. Like, you eat hamburgers, you're part of Western civilization. You have McDonald's, you go to see movies, you wear blue jeans, you like rock music, rap music, basketball, blah, blah. That's Western civilization, right? I grew up thinking that. And that was what we told people during the Cold War. And that was what we told ourselves during the Cold War. And I think that was a pretty good definition of Western civilization. But it's not what J.D. Vance and company think is Western civilization. They think of it as a much narrower thing. What defines Western civilization for them? Europe. Old Europe. Not modern day Europe of like the EU and like Eurocrats and socialized medicine and stuff. But the old traditional Europe of like, Bach and conquistadors and the Catholic Church and, the like electorate of the Palatinate and like, the House of Bourbon and the House of Valois and that, and the House of Hohenzollern and, the House of Plantagenet. Although I think they went extinct, the House of Plantagenet, which is a shame because they had the best name of any of the houses. Plantagenet.
That's pretty good.
That's amazing. Please bring back the Plantagenets, England. Can you just call yourself anyway? My family should have changed their name from Kuznets to Plantagenet instead of Smith. It's less accurate but more awesome. Anyway, the hell was I talking about? That old Europe, of Christianity and like, yes, white people, but like, this is not a racial nationalist movement. This is not like land of whites for the whites. Like, I mean, yes, white nationalists will support Trump, but like, I don't think J.D. Vance is a white nationalist. Look at his wife. Like, he's married to like an Indian American. He does not want to like kick her parents out and like, trade her in for like, a white trad wife. Like, he doesn't want that, right? Elon Musk certainly doesn't want that. Like, Elon Musk is like, I will go to war with you, fuck yourself in the face. Like Elon Musk, he's concerned for like white people being discriminated against in like South Africa, right? Or in America, but not, it doesn't mean he wants like a nation of whites for whites and by whites. Like he's not a white nationalist. He will fight for like Indian immigration, Asian immigration, or Nigerian immigration, whatever. Like as long as they're like, tech people, like he lives in a diverse society. Even Joe Rogan. So Joe Rogan said like, and you hear this refrain from people on the new right all the time. He's like, why does Poland not get to choose to remain white? Well, I mean, honestly, it does, and no one cares. So like, it's a bit of a bad question because like, yes, Poland is just white people. Like they've got a few South Koreans, but like Poland in general, like keeps out immigrants that it doesn't want. And like no one notices this. But anyway, but the point is that Joe Rogan lives in Austin. Joe Rogan lives in a town that's 40% white and is a bunch of libs. All right, that's where he lives. That's where he chooses to live. He does not, it's not about your neighbors. It's about the idea. It's about the idea of Western civilization out there. Descent from Europe, the old European stuff, the heritage, the history, the idea that Europe was a great civilization, should remain a great civilization along the same general lines with the same general characteristics, like, and that's the idea of the new right. And this idea that Western civilization, which includes conservative values, includes traditional Christianity, includes those things, but it's not about living those things, right? The 1990s Christian right that I grew up with, they lived Christianity. They had a personal relationship with Jesus. They would pray at the flagpole every morning. They would tell you about their walk with God. They believed homosexuality was a sin and abortion was a sin and all those things, but they believed that in real life they went to church and that, the preacher at like the Church of Christ would like preach conservative values and they would live those at the local level. It was, the new right is all online and it's all about the idea of not of Christ, but of Christendom. It's this idea of, let me draw a map around Christianity. Let me draw a border. Here's the borders of Christianity as a civilization, like Sam Huntington style. Like, it doesn't matter. They like Russia. It doesn't matter that Russians don't go to church and get divorced all the time and like whatever. Like, that doesn't matter that Russians aren't really Christian. It mattered the fact that the patriarch like supports, like Patriarch Kirill or whatever, he supports Putin's regime. They have reverence, official reverence for Christendom. That's Western civilization to them. If you don't have the reverence for it, it's not civilization. You're like, if you're just a bunch of like blue-haired, genderqueer, leftist, whatever, white people in an all-white town full of that, which is like basically like Eugene, Oregon, or like, Arcadia, or like Oberlin, let's say, those are places that's a bunch of white people and like they get together and like dye their hair blue and like, say they're trans and whatever. And so like that's not Western civilization to them. Yes, it's white people. Yes, their ancestors were Christian, right? But it doesn't have the reverence for the Europeanness of greatness that they care about. So they don't have this coordinating mechanism saying, this is us. This is our team. This is our civilization, blah, blah. Here's what we stand for. Here's what we've always stood for. Here's our heritage, blah, blah. It's an online heritage indigeneity movement.
And for people unfamiliar with Sam Huntington's sort of thesis or contributions, can you briefly explain it and how it relates to the new right?
Yes. Sam Huntington drew a map around different civilizations, quote unquote. Japan was its own civilization, which I agree with. I kind of agree with Sam Huntington's idea of like civilizations drawing map. I disagree with him about what they are necessarily, but he's right that you can sort of identify local civilizations. I think that's pretty reasonable idea. But then he drew a boundary at East Europe and said you have like Slavic civilization or whatever, and then West Europe as a civilization. He drew a Cold War boundary between civilizations. The new right thinks that Russia's part of us, right? They're on our side. They're white, they're Christian, they have reverence for the idea of Europe. They're no longer godless commies, right? They're us, and they're on our civilization. So they draw the boundaries a little different than Huntington, but they basically think like, Europe, sort of white or white-ish, descended from Christendom, blah, blah. This was a civilization. And there's this idea of like, that all of the Christian lands of Christendom used to be united during the Middle Ages. It is medieval in a deep way. It is late Roman Empire, Crusader, early modern sort of Baroque era stuff. It's got this through line. It's not a new idea of this civilization. This is not a new idea. What's new is that it's all online, and it's sort of about like the memes of it instead of like this civilization in real space. But we can get to that.
Well, what Huntington also said, right, is that, he said the conflicts, he wrote it in the 90s, right, this book, Clash of Civilizations. He said the conflicts would be less about economic and political differences the way it was during the Cold War, and more around cultural and religious differences, which somewhat predicted identity politics.
The problem was that, online there are no boundaries and borders. And so Sam Huntington drew lines in meat space because he thought that geography and who your neighbors were would always be the most important thing. He did not anticipate, even though it was already starting to coalesce in the early 2000s, you could already see the very beginnings of it, but it didn't really coalesce until social media. He believed, he thought it would all be space-wise, geometric, horizontal, where in fact, what the identity politics turned out to be vertical. It turned out identity politics is like some Asian American person in like Novi, Michigan, sitting there and like vibing with some Asian Australians in like Brisbane over like their shared Asian heritage that actual people in China wouldn't even give a shit about, but like they feel it's like their shared heritage because it's this club online of boba tea memes and like joking about getting higher grades in the SAT and stuff. If you hang out in those groups, that's what they talk about. And like, and like then getting into K-pop and stuff like that. Like it's vertical. It's these verticals, it's people basically delocalized, what we call deracinated people. That means disconnected from the land. People connecting in online space. Online people are your neighbors now. I'm sitting in Tokyo. You are in San Francisco. We are connecting in online space now. And we're connecting with people who share our memes, who are not necessarily our neighbors. Obviously, some people in San Francisco listen to us, but yes, we have things we do with our neighbors. Meet space still matters, right? When we would do like a party or something, it will still, like, people will still take an Uber there and it's still our neighbors. But but identities went online. They went vertical. They are disconnected. It's no longer geometry. It's now network theory. Every mathematician's like, you can solve geometry problems with network theory. Yes. Okay. Kill me. I used a bad metaphor. Anyway, but the point is, it's now about like who's connected point to point instead of like the, like this contiguous map of a thing. And in some ways this makes identity politics less scary, because like identity politics 150 years ago meant you cleanse the interior and you police the perimeter, right? Like Serbia for the Serbs means if you're in Serbia and you're not a Serb, you're fuck you. At the best you get expelled, and at the worst you get an early grave. And so that's what that meant. And then policing the perimeter meant Serbia would go to war with Croatia and like bomb them over like who gets this town, right? Border wars, territory wars, and then ethnic cleansing and genocide was the hallmark of identity politics in the 150 years ago. Now identity politics has gone online. So basically it's whose notional identity group can get online status, who can dunk on who. Nobody ever really wins, right? It's like, can I make like white people unpopular on social media? That's decolonial politics in 1965. It would be like, kill the white man, expel the white man from like wherever, I don't know, whatever town. But like now it's not that. It's like dunk on the white man and like, get a lot of retweets for saying like white people suck. Like that's identity politics now. It's all a bunch of dunk wars. And I see the new right as using real life things to win online meme battles, because online meme battles are what they care about. Like those Venezuelans they deported, right? They just grabbed some people off the street. I'm sure some of those guys were gangbangers. I'm sure some of those guys were not. There was this like gay baker with like a tattoo saying like, I love my family or whatever. And they grabbed him. They were like, you're part of Tren del Agua, wake up in a Salvadoran torture dungeon. That he's there now. I shouldn't laugh about that. We just tortured some random Hispanic dude because he had a tattoo for like his mom or some shit. Like that's evil. That's an evil thing to do. But why did they do it? It wasn't because anyone knew that guy in real life. It wasn't because he was anyone's neighbor. It didn't matter where he was. They could have grabbed and deported him from like fucking Macau or, anywhere. They could have grabbed and deported him from like some island in the Pacific, and no one would have cared because it didn't matter where he was. It mattered who he was. It was the vertical that mattered. It was the fact that our gang, the MAGA, can grab you for just having a tattoo and send you to a Salvadoran torture dungeon if we feel like we have status, we have power, we, our identity group strong. It was for online dunk wars that they just tortured that guy.
For what it's worth, I agree that the substance and optics of these deportations are retarded. So I'm in agreement with you. I do wonder if they're also trying to win some legal battles. Maybe they already won them, but at least in the last few years, affirmative action, DEI, right? And I think they're fighting that too. But that said, I think there's a big gap between being anti-DEI and being white nationalist. And I'm glad you sort of agree that these.
I mean, no one likes DEI. Like, do you notice how Trump is like DEI is bad and we're going to do something to universities? And like, instead of like suing, they could have sued to keep their DEI programs and just like taking it all the way and like, sneakily change the names and doing all this stuff. And they're like, nope, bye. DEI's gone. We're firing all these people. Like, we're closing this office. University of California, University of Michigan, they all immediately folded. Oh, Trump is making us close DEI. Oh, no, we certainly didn't want to do that. Wow, fascists making us do this. You wanted to do this. Everyone hated DEI, and it was this, it's a preference cascade. Timur Karam? Like, it's a preference cascade. Everyone freaking hated DEI and was waiting for, like, the first available excuse to get rid of it. And, like, now they're getting rid of it. Yay. And like the people who really love DEI will not get rid of it. They will sneakily do it. Just like when you made laws against anti-black discrimination or female discrimination in the 70s, some companies still sneakily practiced it. And some governments and country clubs and whatever, they just kept it on the down low and said, I bet they won't sue us. We're below their radar. And they were right some of the time, right? There were relatively few lawsuits and relatively few of those lawsuits won. Just in the same way, you're going to get some anti-white discrimination, anti-male discrimination will remain in some companies and some nonprofits and some blah, blah. But most people don't actually want that. They did that because they were bullied into it by social media. Universities, it was social media that bullied universities into doing DEI. And now that, they don't care about like sit-ins or something. Just call the cops. Like eventually people will just get expelled from school. It's like, we learned how to deal with that shit in like the 80s when they were like, okay, enough of that, bye. Like, guess who needs a job? You. Guess who needs you? Not us. You're on financial aid, bitch. Bye. Like, that's, but online, they don't know how to deal with social media criticism online because it hurts their reputation.
Going back to the Vance argument for a second, I think it's like, I agree that no one really cares. Poland is just, continue to be Poland. No one cares. I think he's talking about more like, hey, England, basically countries that have very high amounts of immigration from countries or sort of religions that they see as like hostile to the native sort of culture and population. And they see the native culture or native people as not, maybe that's not the right word, but basically people in England not being able to stand up.
The white people in England can't stand up for themselves. And but that's not even important. What's important is, yes, that's important. And when Vance talks about free speech, that's what he's talking about. He's saying, you can't say bad things about Islam. You can't say shit like that. If you say racist stuff, you'll be put in jail, blah, blah. Yeah, he's right. That is an abrogation of freedom of speech. That is illiberal. That is, that is authoritarian and illiberal in Europe. Guess what? Europe is still less free than us in many ways, right? So he's right. Sure. But here's the thing. What they really want is for the government to stand up for it. They want the British government to protect notionally the idea, the interests of like Christians and whites and blah, blah, the traditional people of Europe.
Whatever China does.
If you're in Britain and you have like, Pakistani neighbors who are doing stuff you don't like, then yes, meat space matters. There are people who don't want immigrants living near to them. But in America, we just don't see that. I'm talking about America here. I'm not even talking about, when I say the new right, I'm not even talking about like British guys who are rioting or whatever. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about JD Vance. I'm talking about like, yes, maybe they say like someday if we have that much like immigration, we could they could come to our community, but come on, it's America. They're already there. Like like, you want Muslims, go to Dearborn, Michigan. Like, America's a big country where there's room to spread out, and nobody's Muslim neighbors are bothering them. You know, like, we are a big country that's spread out. We live online. It's, for them, it's all memes. It's all like, who gets to say that they're the sons of the soil? Who gets to say that they're the people who, like, the privileged people for whom this country is really for? And like, if you think about it, like, a lot of decolonial leftists, like, quote unquote anti-racist stuff, which is against racism in the sense that antimatter is against matter. It's simply matter with the opposite charge. Right? It's like, a lot of anti-racist stuff is about privileging BIPOC people, you know, and then you know, deprivileging whites, and basically saying, like, whites, you are Untermensch, you are the interlopers, you are colonialists, colonizers, you are sort of lesser people within the nation. It's mimetic. It's who gets to get called on first in class and stuff like that. It's a bunch of like mimetic dunking on white people. And yes, there may be like some meat-based dunking on white people too. Like, you may kick white people out of your stupid little club at university, or like some lefty professor may not call on white students because they think that's racist to call on white students. That's a real thing that happened, by the way. Yes, you can have stuff in meat space. I'm not saying it doesn't matter at all, but ultimately it's about like, who gets bragging rights online, who gets to say, this is my country. And when you know, the leftist people say, like, you know, slavery built this country. It was slaves who built this country. Well, it's factually wrong. I mean, they built like a bit of this country. Like, some of the country was built by slaves, but like most of it was not, because slaves were only like ever like, you know, 10% of the population, whatever. Like, you can't have 10% of the population building the whole thing. Like, most of the country, especially because like much of the country didn't have slaves in it for a lot of the time. And like, so no, it wasn't, you know, mostly not slaves who built the country. But when you say slavery built this country, you're looking for dunks. You're looking for group status dunks, right? And that's what the new right is doing. They're looking for group status dunks in the name of Western civilization. That's why Pete Hegseth has a Deus Vult tattoo, I think. I think he has a Deus Vult tattoo. And it's like, it's meme crusades. It's the meme crusades. It's like, you know, like in the actual crusades, it's like, well, the Saracens, the heathens, came and took some of our lands. Those were Christian lands, and now Christendom will fight back. We're going to send a bunch of, you know, French guys who don't even know how to take a shower and have an IQ of 70 to retake this, you know, holy land through like the sheer religious fervor, blah, blah, blah. It didn't work. Preview, it did not work. It worked in a small area for a small amount of time. You had some crusader states and blah, blah. But like, mostly that didn't work. But like, it was a meat space crusade, right? It was a real life crusade. Deus Vult, you got some guys with swords and, you know, battle axes and like with the big helmets and stuff that you can't even see out of. And like, they were like going and fighting some Turks and like, fight. And like, how'd that work out? But like, the meme crusades, now it's online. It's about like, you know, we're not reclaiming the Holy Land. We're reclaiming X. That's the Holy Land that was reclaimed by the meme crusade. You know, it's digital online territory. It's reclaiming respect space. And I don't see how those wars ever get won, because nobody's going away. And unless you make the Great Firewall of America, like to imitate China, unless you do that, you're going to spend all your entire life right next to foreigners, talking to foreigners all day long on social media. You cannot, like, unless you build a China-style Great Firewall, foreigners will always be your neighbors in digital space. Like, you're always like, European liberals are always going to be yelling right in your face. The libs will be right there, and like all the, like, you know, you're like, expel the Muslims, blah, blah, blah. Well, they're still going to be right there. They're just going to be in your feed where you live. Like, and if you live on X, if you're just shit posting on X or Reddit or wherever all day, like, there's going to be a shit ton of like Pakistanis there posting at you. There's going to be Saudis and like Ian Miles Chong, a Malaysian, will be posting at you all day. You're going to be taking your cues from like a freaking Malaysian, or Captive Dreamer, some Canadian guy. Like, this is where you live now. You live on social media, you know, especially if you're in politics. Like, I think normies are getting off social media. Normies are going to group chats. They're going to like, or just real life hangouts, or just texting again. But like, all the politics brained fucking brain fried people of the new right and the new left and the woke left, all those people live on social media because all they want to do is have these meme wars all day. Right? Most people are dropping out of the meme wars and going to live their goddamn life and going to a fucking party. But then, everybody, like all the 10% of the population that's absolutely politics brained is still there on X posting, like, ha ha ha, ratioed, and like, and those wars never get won, but it's a shrinking segment of the population. And unfortunately, that segment is now doing bad things to us in meat space through tariffs and through like grabbing random like guys with like I love mom tattoos and sending them to Salvadoran torture dungeons. But also tariffs, most importantly, tariffs will wreck your life for stupid memes, online status dunks for Western civilization that like most people don't give a shit about.
Yeah, it's funny. It's like we close on this, in the Abundance book, Derek talks about how, or Derek and Ezra talk about how at sort of these local meetups, the NIMBYs just have more time on their hands, and so they go to the meetings and block things, and sort of the policymakers think that they represent the population, but in fact they don't. And similarly on social media, the craziest people are the most active, and so policymakers think that they're getting a representative sample set, but in fact they're getting an extreme sort of view.
Right, exactly right, and that's right. So Martin Gurry wrote about this in Revolt of the Public, and it was exactly right. He said the masses, the populace is not the public. Right? The public is a tiny sliver, is a small sliver of the populace that's politically engaged, and those are the people that yell. They do all the yelling. And social media gave them a tool to yell at anyone and everyone, and that's why every institution went woke. Because this tiny woke fringe was able to just wag the dog. They were able to control universities and NGOs and corporations stuff by yelling at them on social media, because you had a small percent of the population who was really engaged on Twitter and also Reddit and Facebook, but like mostly Twitter, who was able to just yell at you, yell in your face, make your reputation bad or whatever. And that tiny public was able to control the larger populace and all the institutions and organizations thereof through yelling online. And Elon has helped the situation by taking over X and turning it into like a right-wing space and making all the lefty chuds leave for blue sky and the righty chuds congregate on X. But like it fundamentally hasn't solved the problem that like there's this vast silent majority, and it's bigger than the silent majority ever was during Nixon's time when he coined that term. Right? The silent majority is much bigger because the silent majority is in group chats and they're texting and they're going to real life hangouts, and they're hanging out in real life because they, the like 1% of the population that's on Twitter, the Twitter shouters, of which you and I are part. We are part of the ruling class. Like I want to disempower our class, but I want to disempower not you and me specifically, but the entire class that we're part of. The shouting class rules us, and the shouting class must be disempowered. And like it or not, old media monopolies did disempower the shouting class. Like Dan Rather, and Peter Jennings and the old editorial board of the old New York Times, they disempowered the crazies in America because they wouldn't let them talk. The crazies weren't able to talk. And of course, many normal people weren't able to talk too. And whoever opposed the Iraq war wasn't able to talk, and So obviously this leads to elitist media, leads to problems. But at the same time, the crazies, like as a crazy, how could you scream and shout at someone important? You could protest in real life and know everyone would ignore you. You could write a letter to the editor and it wouldn't even be accepted. You could pass out pamphlets. As a crazy, you were disempowered. Now the crazies rule our civilization. Every civilization is ruled by these few fucking crazies. The platform is the enemy because every organization is afraid of getting yelled at on X or whatever.
There's a quote you said like 5 years ago. I had you on my podcast, and you said something like, when you give everyone a voice, don't be surprised when they all say fuck you.
Yes. When they give everyone a voice, right. And so that's what happened. Thank you, technologists. Thank you, liberal, like, engineers living in San Francisco in 2005 who dreamed of like giving the voiceless a voice. Thank you, Jack Dorsey. Thank you for opening the floodgates of hell. Anyway, that's where we are now, and we're just starting to come back from that. Maybe if we can just get everyone off X and we can shrink the power and blue sky and shrink the power of these platforms to irrelevance, maybe we can get out of this by having it just be a rubber room where the crazies shout in. But where are we going to get our information? podcasts, YouTube. We're still going to get our information online, maybe just not from the very craziest sliver. We'll get it from like slightly less crazy people who have like the ability, who have like the chops to make like nice videos on YouTube.
Maybe your curation will just get better in terms of like maybe things like prediction markets, or we'll just be able to filter the signal from the noise better, perhaps.
Yeah, I'm hoping AI will do this. I'm hoping that we get AI Dan Rather to curate our shit for us. Now, I don't know that it's going to be better than like real Dan Rather, but it's certainly better than what we got. Like AI Dan Rather, save us.
Thesis, antithesis, synthesis. Maybe that's the. No, as always, it's a great conversation on the new left and the new right. As always, until next time.
Until next time.
Hey guys, today we're going to close out with listener Corey MacArthur's inspired track, That's Too Good Not to Share. Find a link to the full version in our show notes.
Freestyle rap. Hey man, good to see you.
Hey Noah, good to see you, bud.
How many of those rhyme workshop?
Hey Noah, good to see you, bud.
Hey man, good to see you. And rap. Freestyle rap. Freestyle rap style.